Welcome to the second half of the third day of NDC. I'm sure you've kept all of your energy for this session and haven't spent any of it previously. Is that right? Yes. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about difficult conversations today. And to give you an indication why I titled this talk Difficult Conversations or How Not to Chicken Out, I want to tell you a story about me in my early leadership career. The first ever leadership job I had, I failed terribly at. I made a mistake which I'm sure anybody who's been in leadership has made, which is I didn't have difficult conversations. There was a situation where I was obviously responsible for hiring people, and I'd hired an excellent engineer to my team. But as you can probably guess where this story is going, there may have been an excellent engineer, but they just didn't fit in with the rest of my team. They produced the right amount of code in the right way, but they just caused a whole amount of disturbance to the rest of my team. And unfortunately for me and for my team, one really great team member of mine ended up handing their notice in, resigning, because they just couldn't work with this other person. And this was a difficult conversation I didn't have. I chickened out. The second difficult conversation happened a week later, where my boss at the time pulled me into a meeting room and said to me, "Andrew, what's your job?" And I don't know if you can feel the shivers down your spine that I feel, but when your boss brings you into a private meeting room and says, "What's your job?" it's generally not a good thing. Being the young, naive 24-year-old I was at the time, I turned to him and I said, "To write code." This is me, a lead engineer, running a team of 5 people, and I just told my boss that my job was to write code. And he looked at me for a second and he said, "No. You're a lead engineer. You're not just a senior engineer anymore. You're a lead engineer. What's your job?" So I thought about it for a moment. "To write really good code." No, he said, "Andrew, that's not your job. That's not your job as a lead engineer." And this could have been a story of me ended up being fired. But luckily for me, it wasn't. It was a story of my boss recognizing that I didn't understand what my role meant, and that I needed help, and I needed support, and I needed guidance, and I needed coaching. And this started my journey of learning leadership skills, of understanding what it means to be the difference of an individual contributor and a leader of technology, a leader of people, a leader of a business. And so luckily for me, that was a very, very long time ago, and I spent the past decade and a half learning these skills. And luckily for you, they're a lot easier to find now than they were 15 years ago, because we didn't have talks at conferences like this 15 years ago. So I feel really lucky to come and talk about this with you on the last day and the last afternoon of NDC Oslo. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about these few things: the what and why of difficult conversations. What are they? Why should we have them? Why should we not avoid them? And I'm going to take you through the mindset and preparation that'll make you much more effective when you're going to have them with the people around you. Now, I'm an engineer, and so I like models, I like algorithms, and so I'm going to give you a model and an algorithm of how to approach them. Because at the end of the day, we like these things, they make it easier. And one of the things that I really enjoy is when we can make a complex topic simple. And last, if we've got time, we'll have some Q&A. I don't know if we do. If we don't have time, then we'll do it in the hallway track, or we'll do it in the expo hall. So, other point, we're very lucky to be in this room. I was in one of the other rooms a few days ago, and they're not very conducive to conversation. I can actually see your faces. I couldn't see people's faces in the other room, so I like this one. So this is not going to be a monologue. I don't want to stand up here for 60 minutes and talk at you. I expect you to be interactive, and that's also a way of keeping your energy up, because we don't want you sitting there slouching for 60 minutes. If you have something you want to say or ask, please do so. please bear in mind the 60-minute limit, so we want to make sure anything we say is a concise question. So who am I and why am I standing here? This is who I am from a personal point of view. I'm a long-term father to a flock of chickens, or as we call them, chucks in Australia, and a short-term father to a flock of humans, or as we call them, financial burdens in Australia. And I also love travel. I love getting out there and seeing the world. I absolutely adore just getting out of your comfort zone. I feel like so often we can just be in a rut in our lives, and getting out there, seeing different things. Speaking at NDC Oslo, I've taken the opportunity to go see Iceland, Denmark, parts of the UK while I'm here. It's just such a great opportunity. Going from one place to another is boring. I don't like A to B. I like A to D, E, F, and then B. It's much more fun. From a professional point of view, I've been paid to write code for about 20 years at this point, been a leader for about 15. And I took those skills of leading and turned them into being a trainer and a coach and a mentor for technical leaders. This is an issue we have in our industry, is that not enough people understand these skills, and we promote the smartest technologists into leadership positions and then sit back and watch as they fail. I saw this again and again in our industry, and I wanted to fix it. And so I've been doing that for about the past 5 years. And I created a platform called Debugging Leadership because my genuine belief that I hold, the value that I live my life with, is that happy and effective technical leaders build happy and effective technical teams. There's this very direct correlation between the two. Now, when I say leaders, I think I saw Melissa just come in a minute ago. Yeah, hey. So when I say leaders, I don't necessarily mean somebody who has the word lead or manager in their title. Anybody who works in a way that does part of their job by working with other people is somebody who is a leader. So who would count themselves as a leader in this room? About 10%, about 10%, okay. So a leader, in my way of thinking about things, can be a few different things. One of them could be the way we always think about a leader, a manager. You know, if you distill that to the smallest level, it's somebody who helps you get promoted. That's kind of the basic level of management, but that's not what I mean. You know, it's somebody who teaches you new skills, who helps you learn those skills, even if they don't have them themselves. It's somebody who helps you become the person who you want to become and helps other people around you work better together. There's this forgotten type of leader that we need to think about more and talk about more, called glue people, who just by essence of them being in a team make the team better. And they might not have the role of lead or manager, but they exist and they make the team better. And the reason they do that is because they have people skills. They have core skills. They have what some people call soft skills. And so, you know, these people are incredibly important. There's another type of leader in software development that doesn't exist in a few other places, which is if you ever break production and you see everybody swivel their chairs to look at somebody, that person's a leader in the team. So based on that definition, who counts himself as a leader now? Much more, much more. Great. That's what I want you to feel. I want you to feel that these skills are not necessarily to be kept and held by people with manager or director or lead in their title. I want you to feel an ownership of these skills. So we're here to talk about difficult conversations, but what are difficult conversations? What do they mean? Does anybody want to give me a shout out of something that if you were to look at a dictionary and go down to D and look at difficult conversations, what that might mean? Challenging, yeah. Why might they be challenging?
Challenging someone's ideas of who they are, how they work, what they've achieved.
I love that. Challenging somebody's ideas of who they are. That's great. I love that. Anybody else?
Refactoring code.
So yeah, refactoring code. Yeah, giving somebody a PR feedback could be a difficult conversation. There's one here. Uncomfortable, definitely. And sorry? Potential negative consequences. Love that, yeah. So really what we're talking about here are things that have high stakes, high impact, or high emotions. So if we're doing a security risk analysis on this type of thing, and we're looking at the chance of something going wrong and the impact if it does go wrong. Really, we're looking at that quadrant of high impact. And all of these are types of difficult conversations. Who has been in one of these conversations in the past? Pretty much everybody. Who is in one of these conversations on a more than weekly basis? Still quite a few people. Yeah. These define our careers. I want you to think about that for a moment. Our success as individuals are defined by the moments in these conversations. How we achieve what we want to achieve in our personal lives through the work that we do and what that brings to us are achieved through these types of conversations. So again, even if you don't have lead or manager or director in your title, these skills are important. So as part of my job, as part of what debugging leadership does, I teach people how to approach these things. So I teach people how to give performance reviews. I teach people how to be more influential and explain technical concepts to non-technical audiences. I teach people how to interview better, how to be interviewed better, and how to communicate with everybody around them in a better way. And I realize that there's this common pattern that exists between all of these types of conversations that can really help no matter what type of difficult conversation you're trying to have. And there came the idea for this talk. Yes, I could sit here and give you a 60-minute talk on giving feedback. I could sit here and give you a 60-minute talk on how to give somebody a performance review or how to interview somebody. But that means you're going to have to go to 10 of those talks. And so I wanted to take the best bits of those 10 talks and give them to you. So what happens if we don't have difficult conversations? What happens if we don't have a performance review, if we don't have an interview, if we don't give somebody the feedback that we want to give them? What happens?
Nothing.
Nothing. Yeah, sometimes absolutely nothing.
It snowballs. Get worse.
It could even get worse. 100%. This is the thing that we often forget. So I originally was born in the UK. I now live in Australia. And there's a commonality in a lot of the culture between the two. And one of them is there's a phrase in, especially the part of England where I'm from, which is Yorkshire, which is "Beery," which basically means everything's going to be okay, forget about it. In Australia, there's a phrase which is "she'll be all right," which basically means the same thing. This does not apply to difficult conversations. Difficult conversations get worse if you ignore them. And so everything in our innate structures as humans, and especially people from Yorkshire and Australia, we need to fight this urge to ignore difficult conversations. And I want to tell you a little bit of a story of an analogy that might help with understanding that. Like I said, I love travel. I love getting around the world. And one of the things that I regret the most about moving to Australia. I love the place, I love the country. There's nothing to do with Australia, but I genuinely regret leaving my Land Rover and not taking it with me. Have you ever had a car that just walking past it on the roads, not even getting in it, not even driving it, just walking past it makes you smile? This was what my Land Rover was to me. It was my pride and joy, and I loved it with all of my heart, and I left it in the UK, and I regret it to this day. Anyway, this talk isn't about that. This is about a journey I went on with my Land Rover. So a friend of mine and I used to regularly take our vehicles to Europe and drive around Europe from the UK. And this particular trip, we got the ferry across from the UK to France. The plan was drive through France, drive through Germany, come back through Luxembourg, and do this kind of really great loop of Western Europe. And we got to the car in the UK, and I looked under the car. I do general pre-check of the vehicle before I go on a multi-thousand-mile journey. And on the floor under the car was a few drops of oil. It's a Land Rover. Land Rovers, if they're not leaking oil, there's probably something wrong with it. And so I kind of dismissed that and didn't think much of it. Then we were driving onto the ferry across into France, and suddenly there was this, sound coming from under the vehicle. So I took the Land Rovers are great. You can basically get to every bit of it while you're driving. So I took the inner panel off so I could see the drive shaft and the transfer case, and I took that off, and I'm driving down the motorway, 100 kilometers an hour, looking at this prop shaft while I'm driving. Don't do that; it's very dangerous. And I could just hear this, and I just couldn't work out what it was. So what do you think I said? Beep, she'll be all right. Kept driving. Then we got to Luxembourg, and suddenly there's like, and the car ground to a halt. I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I could only limp in first gear, which in a Land Rover is about 1 mile an hour. And I limped to a local garage. Luckily for me, I'd broken down in Luxembourg about a mile away from a garage that specialized in Land Rovers. So I went to this garage, and I spoke to them, and they diagnosed what was wrong. I'd broken the transfer case, which, if you know much about vehicles, is bad. And basically what had happened is one of the gears had sheared off and had effectively exploded and destroyed the entire transfer case. Again, luckily for me, this Land Rover specialist garage in the middle of Luxembourg, where nobody spoke English, and I half spoke French and my friend half spoke German, managed to discuss with them, and they happened to have the part that I needed. Otherwise, that would have been a very expensive tow back to the UK. But do you want to know how much it cost me to replace this transfer box in the middle of nowhere in Luxembourg?
3,000 euros.
No, 12,000 euros. So, go back to the start of my story when I noticed the oil drops on the floor. What do you think it would have cost me to have fixed it if I'd have noticed an issue then? A few €100? If I'd have stopped when it was just going down the French motorways, maybe €1,000? Not 12,000 euros. So why do I tell this story? Next time you're having a difficult conversation in the future and you feel yourself wanting to chicken out, I want you to remember me crying as I handed over my credit card to a Luxembourg garage. This is what happens when we ignore difficult conversations. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes they get much, much worse. Lastly, before we go into the meat of this talk and start discussing this model that I put together, I want to dissuade you of a tendency at this point. Often people feel like they should get to this level of having difficult conversations where they feel comfortable having them. I don't want you to ever feel that. Because if you feel comfortable when you're having a performance review, or you're interviewing somebody, or you're having any kind of difficult conversation, what that means is you've disconnected your empathy from the other person. Being comfortable means you don't care about which way it goes. It means you don't care about the other person on the other side of the conversation. So I do not want you to aspire to being comfortable when you have a difficult conversation. I want you to aspire to be confident, which is a slightly different thing. Confident means you've thought about it, you've planned, you've got the right mindset to approach it. But if you ever fully feel comfortable, it's a chance that you've forgotten about the human being on the other side of this conversation. And I don't ever want you to get there. So in your mind, think confident, maybe not comfortable. Okay, so what can we do about difficult conversations? We know what they are. We know why we need to tackle them. We know we need to be confident, not comfortable. How do we actually deal with them in a way that is productive? The two words I want you to think about are mindset and preparation. Now, what do I mean by mindset? Mindset is the way of thinking about the situation. It's your internal narrative that's going on in your mind about what the conversation is about. It's the way you position it and model it in your own mind. It's not necessarily something you can write on a piece of paper, although there are ways that we're going to talk about to help with that. But it's just the way that you think about it. And often mindset comes down to courage. Courage to have the conversation. Back in my very first story of this bad hire that I made, I failed at this point. I didn't have the courage to have the difficult conversation because I didn't have the right mindset about why I should have it. So again, question, what are some of the things that can challenge our courage? What do you think might have been going through my mind back 15 years ago? Somebody want to shout out?
What if somebody gets mad at me?
What if somebody gets mad at me? Where's that coming from? Why is it a bad thing if somebody gets mad at you? You might want to be liked, yeah. Why might you want to be liked? I'm going to do the 5 whys in a minute, aren't I?
Makes it easier to get things done. People like you.
Interesting, yes. Sometimes it does. That's definitely an over beer conversation. But definitely being nice can sometimes make things easier to get done.
Being a people pleaser?
Yeah, definitely. Often the reason why we lack courage is because we want to be a people pleaser. There's another big reason, which is especially prevalent in our industry, which is imposter syndrome. Especially if you're in a position of some authority in an organization, again, doesn't have to be lead or manager or director in your title, you could feel that you're not the right person to be in that role and somebody else might be better in that role. And imposter syndrome can lead to a lack of courage. So I want to give you a series of questions that we can ask ourselves to help with the mindset before we approach these things. How can we help reframe the way we think about it to make sure that A, we have it in the first place, but B, we have it in the best possible way? So the first question is, lovely and selfish. Let's start from a place of thinking about ourselves, because that's generally pretty easy for most people. Why is it in my best interest to have this difficult conversation? So to give you an example, if I'm giving performance feedback to somebody, it might be because them doing that particular thing means I meet my goals as a leader. If I'm a developer and I'm giving feedback to a designer, it might be because I cannot produce the thing that they've designed. It's too complicated for me to design. And I want to make sure that I don't have that on my targets to produce something that's difficult. So let's start off being selfish. The first step in mindset is, why is it in my best interest? But then I want you to think about it from their point of view. Why is it in their best interest to have the conversation? So again, the designer example, me telling the designer that I can't produce what they've designed means that they're not going to be surprised when what I produce isn't what they designed. It means that the project manager isn't surprised when what I've produced isn't what they've designed. So again, trying to think through what the other person can gain from you discussing this difficult topic with them. Then, especially if you're a leader, we can expand this out a little bit further. Why is it in the best interest of my team to have this conversation? Designer example, it could be in the best interest of my team because I'm teaching the designer what is easy to do and what is difficult to do. And that means that if I have this conversation, it's going to be easier for the rest of my team to have this conversation because the designer's prepared for it and understands a little bit more about the complexities of what we're doing. And lastly, triggering into a little bit of that fear. Again, credit card, 12,000 euros, still makes me cry. What will happen if I don't have this difficult conversation? So these questions should hopefully give us the courage and the right mindset to have this conversation. So I am skipping through this a little bit because we're going to do some very in-depth examples. We'll go through it a little bit more in a minute. So next is preparation. So if mindset is about what's in our minds, then preparation is about what we can gather to make this much more fluid and much more seamless and have less difficulties when having it. So these are things that we can gather to make the situation better. So for example, if I'm talking about a particular ticket, then making sure I've got the ticket easily accessible. If I'm talking about a particular design, making sure I've got the design easily accessible. If I'm talking about somebody's behavior that I want them to change, then potentially getting some examples of why that behavior might not be appropriate or what alternative behaviors could be more appropriate would be useful. And this means that what happens is people, when you're having this conversation, can't take it in a direction in which you're less prepared for, because you've thought about all of the different things that happen, and you can make sure that you're understanding all of the ways. Like if we think of a flow diagram of how the conversation could go, we can think of the data and information we can gather to make sure that each stage of the flow diagram, we have what we need to discuss it. So what are some examples of the types of preparation I'm talking about? Well, gathering data and outside opinions. Again, what are the things that we can have that are numbers, that are facts or opinions, and know the difference between those two things? If we're presenting data as data, we need to make sure that we present opinions as opinions, and we know which one is which. We do not present opinions as data. We can think through possible objections that people might have to what's happening, how we might be able to overcome them, and we can have these multiple plans on the flow diagram of how things can go. Now, I do this talk as part of a half-day workshop, and this question always comes up. Aren't you just manipulating people by doing this? Every workshop I do asks this question. Now, all of these skills, whether you put them, I have a philosophical position, which is, a lot of people call these soft skills. I don't like that term. I don't like that term because having unfortunately had to let many people go and fire many people in my career, I can tell you that that is hard, not soft. And learning to do that effectively and compassionately is not a soft thing, it's a really hard thing. And so I personally don't like the term soft skills. I prefer core skills or people skills, because these are really what it's about. It's about the core things that are important to us as humans, and about the people around us. Better preparation and learning these skills isn't manipulation. Manipulation is when you're going through this from a point of view of trying to win your outcome at the expense of others. Everything we're discussing here, why is it in their best interest? Why is it in the team's best interest? This is about trying to position it to the benefit of them. And if you can honestly and genuinely say that you're trying to achieve an outcome that is in the best interest of the person you're talking to, it's not manipulation, it's help. And so please don't look at this and think, aren't I just being taught to manipulate people? Because you're not. Okay, so let's go through some examples. If you want to follow along, you're welcome to do so. I will be showing everything on the slides, so you don't have to. Sometimes it's a little bit easier. Is that QR code working nicely? Good. Don't worry if you missed it, this QR code is going to be later in the talk as well. But what this is a 3-page PDF, because I wanted to give you something to take away, and I wanted to print these out, but I don't have SSW's budget, so I can't afford to print out 300 pieces of paper. And so I decided I'd give you it as a PDF instead. And this effectively takes you through all of the questions and more that we've just been talking about for the past 30 minutes. And it helps you with the mindset and the preparation and the positioning of approaching any difficult conversation, no matter what it is. So we're going to go through this worksheet, and I'm going to go through a couple of examples. So the first page is all about trying to position the difficult conversation. And it's you can think of it as the logistics of how you're going to approach it. So the what and the who. So what is this difficult conversation going to be about? Trying to discuss it objectively. We don't want to put emotions into this necessarily. we do want to try and make this an objective description of why we're having this difficult conversation and who is going to have it. Obviously, if you're giving somebody performance feedback, you don't want to do that in the middle of a stand-up or the middle of an all-hands in the company. You quite often want to keep those things as one-to-ones or private discussions. Then the when. Often you don't want to give somebody this type of stuff at 4:30 on a Friday. That doesn't go well. I once had a boss who rang me up at 3 o'clock on a Friday while a loved one was in hospital, and he knew this, and he rung me up at 3 o'clock on a Friday while my loved one was in hospital, telling me that I needed to ring somebody else up and fire them. I left that job very quickly afterwards, because that just shows a complete lack of respect for me and my life and the life and the person he wanted me to fire. You do not do this type of stuff on a Friday. You send that person into a spiral over the weekend. This is closely followed by sending somebody a meeting invite at 4:30 on a Friday that says quick chat for 9 o'clock on Monday. That sends people into a spiral all weekend. Don't do that. Where should we have this conversation? This obviously is very subjective and depends on the situation. It might be in person, might be remote, depends on your organization. So the first page is all about the logistics. The second page is all of the questions we just discussed on mindset. Why is it in my best interest? Why is it in their best interest? Why is it in the team's best interest? And what will happen if I don't have it? The third page is all of the preparation questions. So what data and evidence, what opinions, what objections, and what ways can this go awry? So all of the stuff we talked about in a nice, easy to use PDF, and the forms in a PDF are fillable in, so you don't need to print it off and use a pen. You can just go into the PDF and type on your keyboard. So I've got two examples here. And I'm going to gauge the room on which example we do first, just in case we run out of time. Hands up if you work for what you would define as a consultancy. Okay? Hands up if you would work for what you would define as a product company. Lovely, that's 50-50. That makes my life easy. Thanks, guys. All right. Let's just do the first example, and we will take it from there. And if we have time, we'll do the second one. So in this example, you can imagine that you're maybe a junior engineer. You're working on a project, and you've been working very closely with a senior engineer, and you're trying to resolve a ticket. That ticket is a little bit outside of your expertise. You're struggling with it, and the senior just isn't giving you the help that you need. You don't really know why. Maybe they're too busy. We've all been in a very similar scenario before. And you're massively late on this ticket. It was estimated for maybe a day, and you're 4 days into it, and you're kind of having a little bit of a freak out because you're just not finishing this ticket in time. So that's the context. You need to tell the project manager what's going on, because you've kept it inside for 3 days. First mistake. Again, the earlier you have a difficult conversation, the easier it is to have it, but we're imagining this scenario that this person's kept it all bottled up inside for the past 3 days. So what is this conversation going to be about? Describe it neutrally. I'm running late on a task I was working on. Ticket said 2 days, it's been 4 days, and I'm not going to be finished anytime soon, and I'm not getting the support I need from my senior. There is no emotion in that. There's no subjectivity. It's fact, fact, fact. We can get onto the emotion and the subjectivity later, but for now, we want to try and be objective. You can think about this as if you were looking through a camera lens. If you had a camera and you were observing the situation, how would you describe it? Because a camera doesn't see into our minds. It can't read our thoughts. It can't feel our emotions. And so this first thing, I want you to imagine that camera. Who is going to have this conversation? Well, myself, obviously, my project manager, obviously, maybe the senior. General good rule of thumb is that if you're going to talk negatively about somebody, they should be in the room. That's a really great rule of thumb for these kinds of things. And if you can't do that for whatever reason, my second rule of thumb, is that you never say something about somebody in private that you haven't said to them already. So if the senior couldn't be in this room for whatever reason, I would make sure that the senior knows everything that I'm going to tell the project manager before I tell the project manager. 2 great rules of thumb that stop gossip and backstabbing in an organization. Make sure that if you say something negative, that person's in the room. If they can't be in the room, anything you say, you should have already have said to them. When are we going to have it? Well, I've been going for 4 days. I need to have this conversation as soon as possible because we need to resolve this. It's not going to resolve itself. Maybe I do it in the daily stand-up. Maybe I do it in the weekly stand-down. It depends on the discussion. But I also don't want to go into detail in the stand-up. I need to make sure I mention it, but I probably don't want to, discuss this in detail in stand-up. We all hate those stand-ups that, end up being diverting and lasting an hour when they should have lasted 5 minutes. So I should probably mention it there and say that, I need to talk to the project manager. If we're remote or hybrid, maybe I do that in a Zoom call. If we're in person, maybe we do that in a meeting room. So logistics, just thinking through how, when, who, and where you're going to have this difficult conversation. So mindset. Why is it in my best interest as a junior to have this difficult conversation? I finished the annoying ticket. We all know what it's like when we've been working on something and bashing our head against it and we just can't resolve it. It's frustrating. So it's in my interest because I get to work on it. I get to finish it. And I look proactive in the eyes of my project manager. I want to build a relationship with this person, and by talking about it with them, it helps build that relationship that I want. And I stop feeling uncomfortable. We all know when we're in stand-up and somebody says, "Hey, how's it going? What are you working on?" and you've said the same thing for 4 days, it's uncomfortable. And so I get to say something different. The other thing is I get to work on something different. Working on the same thing again and again sometimes is really boring. And if I get to resolve this ticket, I get to work on something different, something new and something interesting. So these are all the reasons why I should have it for my own selfish personal reasons. So why is it in the best interest of the project manager? Well, they're making assumptions about the project that are incorrect. Straight away, easy. They're assuming things are going to get done in a particular cadence, a particular schedule that are just not going to get done. And so they need to know for that reason. And the sooner I tell them, the sooner they can effectively manage the situation and change the schedules, get me the help that I need. And if they know, they can prioritize getting me that help. So why is it in the best interest of my team to have this? This can be quite a hard question to answer, but I do encourage you to try to answer it because it helps raise the altitude of how you think about problems. It can be really easy for us to get fixated on what we're doing on a day-to-day basis and forget to raise that altitude and ask how this fits into the wider project, the wider team, and the wider business. So even though this is hard, I really encourage you to do it. So in this example, my team is waiting on me to finish this ticket. They can't do other work that needs the completion of my ticket. Really easy and really simple. But another one is that by me talking about this kind of stuff and demonstrating the behavior of being open about the issues that I'm having, I'm going to build trust with the team. And I'm going to show them that I'm not going to hide these things. I'm going to be open about them. And that the best way to effect a cultural change is to be the change you want to see. And so, I can show my openness and willingness to discuss these things, which should hopefully show the team that they can do that as well. I want to work in a team that does that, so I'm going to do that by doing it myself, being the change I want to see. So what will happen if I don't have this difficult conversation? The ticket won't get done. Pretty easy, pretty simple. I need help, and it's not going to get done. And people will find out that I'm stuck on this ticket. I've been saying for 4 days that I'm still working on this ticket that everybody knows was estimated at 2 days. So people are going to know. It's not as if I'm hiding it from them forever. It's going to get found out. And if people find out without me being proactive in how I tell them, I can't control how they interpret that message. as humans, we have a tendency, it's one of our cognitive biases, to assume the worst in other people. It's a really hard thing to shake, and it's really difficult to overcome that if you have that particular bias. And so if you leave a gap in a narrative, in a story, in an understanding, people will fit the worst possible jigsaw piece into that gap. And so by you being proactive in your explanation, you can make sure that they understand the reality of what's going on rather than the worst possible thing that they can imagine. So preparation. What data and evidence can I gather? Usual stuff about the ticket. It's been 2 days. It was 2 days. It's been 4 days. I've spoken to my senior to help 3 times in the past 4 days. He said he's too busy. All this kind of narrative stuff that describes what's going on. Googled for the answer. Blah blah blah. So what have I done? What data can I gather? That one's pretty obvious. Again, notice I'm talking about my senior here. So again, back to that point. If I'm saying this kind of stuff, either the senior needs to be in the room, or the senior needs to know that I'm saying this. Very important. What other outside opinions can I gather? I spoke to Sally, who said my senior was the same with her. Mike said my senior was great with him. So who knows? Like, there's not really something one way or the other that tells me if this is a me problem or a Jeff problem. But hey, at least I tried. But then from a solution-solving point of view, I spoke to somebody in another team, and they said they might have a solution. So again, I'm just gathering these different viewpoints and opinions about what's going on. These might not come up in the discussion. This might never be part of what I speak to my project manager about. But if they are, I've got the data. If the project manager says, how many times have you reached out to Jeff in the past 3 days, I've got the information there. So lastly, preparation. What objections could be raised? Well, the project manager could say, I didn't try hard enough, and I don't think she will say that, but if they do say that, then I can't see anything else I could have done. They might say, I should have told them sooner. Yep, I should have. That's an objection that is perfectly valid and something that I don't really have a comeback to. I just need to accept that feedback. What are some of the ways this can go awry? I might not get the help I need. I don't think that'll happen. Everybody's motivated to help me. So this is an example that goes through this worksheet for this particular situation. Before we move on to a second example, has anybody got any questions about this one that they want to clarify and why I've answered the questions in the way that I've answered them in this example use of the worksheet? Go for it.
So when you say what are possible ways that this section can go awry?
Yeah.
What if we have like hundreds of possible options and they're all very, very bad?
So for the benefit of people on the live stream or the video, the question was, what are the ways that this could go awry? What if there are many, many, many ways, or hundreds of ways that this could go awry? I think you've got to do a risk analysis type situation with this. The whole thing of what's the probability that this is going to happen, times by the impact if it does happen, and then just kind of rank them based on that, and just prepare, maybe the top few. What you don't want to do with this is to get yourself into a mental cycle of getting over analyzing of this, because you could spend days on this, finding all these different situations, and it can become a procrastination exercise rather than just having the conversation. So I would say definitely pick the most likely or the most impactful ones.
What if the person with whom you need to have the difficult conversation is known to not be reasonable?
So the question was, what if the person who you're going to have it with is known to not be reasonable? I would say that most people don't go to work trying to do a bad job or trying to be difficult. Most people. The people that do are very few and far between. Often when there's somebody that you might interpret as difficult or unreasonable, there's a larger problem going on. There's some misalignment of what you're both trying to achieve. And then we've got to take a step back, and we've got to go through these first few questions of why is it in their best interests to have this conversation. And that you've really got to double down on this, because this is going to be effectively your sales pitch to them as to why you need to have this, why you need to engage with me, and why is it in your best interests. Now, general influence communication skills come into play here as well. Read up on the influence doorways and ways you can become more influential. Like there's great resources out there.
Do you agree in the situation where you think people won't listen to each other to do the steel manning approach, where you speak as them presenting their arguments to check that you understand what their point of view is?
Sure. So the question is, do I agree with the idea of steel manning? For those of you who don't know, steel manning is where you try and put the argument forward as if you were the person who strongly believes in it, and you're trying to position the best possible argument for the thing you don't believe. Yes, I do believe in the value of that. There's a huge amount of empathy you can gain from steel manning somebody else's argument and trying to understand why they believe the things that they believe. If you can do that, if you can't steel man somebody else's argument, you don't understand it. If you cannot put yourself in their place and describe why they believe what they believe, you don't understand them. And so there's this huge value in that, in my opinion. Any more questions before? Yep.
How does your preparation not sound like a sales pitch?
How does your preparation not sound like a sales pitch? So I don't expect you to read this out word for word. It's a bit like, when you're planning a talk, for those of you who have ever done public speaking, apart from these examples here, I'm not reading from bullet points. I know this topic, I know how to talk about it, and so I'm talking off the cuff. I have very few speaker notes in this, because it's something that I know deeply. And that's what you're kind of aiming towards, with the exception of certain pieces of data. I'm not expecting you to have and remember all of these pieces of data. They are acceptable things to look up and say, hey, I've got this report here that gives us that data. But definitely, especially the mindset ones, you shouldn't ever speak them out loud. The preparation ones, you can have resources that you can refer to, but I wouldn't necessarily, unless it's somebody else that has been to this talk, I wouldn't necessarily take the 3-page PDF and put it in front of them and go, we need to have this conversation. If you want to practice it and there's somebody here that you work with, so part of what I do as a job is I build leadership training programs for companies. And it's really great having a bunch of people who have the same glossary, the same terminologies, and understand the same words. Because what you can do is you can practice this stuff in a safe manner. So for example, one of the feedback frameworks that I teach is called SBI-BI. Doesn't matter what it means, unless you want to know, and you can ask me afterwards. If I teach a bunch of people SBI-BI, then if I wanted to give you feedback and we've been on the same training course, I could start off with going, hey, I want to practice SBI-BI on you right now. And so you're kind of in this mode where it's a safe way to practice. So unless you're talking to somebody else who's either been on one of my training courses or been to this talk, I wouldn't expect that. But hey, if you wanted to have a difficult conversation together, could be a great way to kind of practice these skills. Okay. Let's whiz through the next example. So this is an example of speaking to an employee who used their phone during an important client meeting. This is something that happens way more often than it should. So I'm imagining that I'm maybe a principal consultant or a lead consultant in a consultancy, and a more junior member has been, I've got my phone, has been in the meeting playing with their phone. So what is this conversation about? I saw Jonathan playing with his phone during a meeting with the client, and it meant he missed some important information. It also meant the client might have felt he was disengaged and didn't care about the project. Who will be having this? Myself and Jonathan. Again, general rule of giving somebody performance feedback, they're in the room and nobody else. That rule of thumb applies 99% of the time. We don't give somebody negative performance feedback in front of other people. When should I have it? Don't want to wait too long. Another rule of thumb with giving people feedback is that the time between the observed behavior and when you give the feedback should be as short as possible. The idea of 6-month or even worse annual performance reviews are just completely useless. How many times have you been given feedback 11 months and 30 days after it happened, and you're like, I don't remember that? So if we can, the effectiveness of feedback is inversely proportional to the time between when the behavior happened and when the feedback was given. So I'm going to talk to him tomorrow. So where should I do this? Usual thing. You'll notice that this one almost always stays the same. It should be private, it should be one-to-one, maybe in a private meeting room, maybe on Zoom. Why is it in my best interest to have this conversation? I felt uncomfortable watching Jonathan play with his phone. Like, you know, it can be fine to be selfish, it can be fine to talk about your emotions in this one. And the client is going to call me when Jonathan does behavior that they find disrespectful. You know, the clients, if you're in a consultancy, clients often won't call out bad behavior in the room. They'll go away afterwards and they'll give the principal or the CEO a call and go, hey, this person was really disrespectful. I don't want them to have to do that, and I don't want to talk to the client about it. It's an awkward conversation for me, and frankly, I could lose the deal if the client thinks they're being disrespected. So why is it in Jonathan's best interests? He's probably doesn't understand this culture. You know, maybe he's young, maybe it's his first job he's ever had. He wants to be successful, and he needs to understand that his behavior is how he becomes successful. And clients are going to get a bad impression of him. The other thing with this is sometimes, you know, if for example I'm not the CEO, if I'm a lead consultant, the client might not ring me. The client might ring my CEO. And I definitely don't want my CEO giving Jonathan performance feedback. A, because they weren't there, they didn't observe it. And B, they don't have as much empathy and connection with Jonathan as I do. So I'm also saving Jonathan from that by giving him the feedback. So why is it in the best interest of my team? Whatever behavior we let one person exhibit, we're giving permission for other people to exhibit the same behavior. Simple. You know, I want my team to be respectful to clients, and if I enable them to exhibit these behaviors, it's not going to help anybody. And so I need to make sure that it's helping the team by cutting this in the bud before it gets worse. And if I don't have this, Jonathan won't learn the right way, the client will be annoyed, and my team will get upset. Data, I don't need much data. I was there, I saw it, there's not much data I can gather. Opinions, this is something that I wouldn't encourage you to write, but I'm putting myself in the mind of somebody else. I know I'm writing this, but I double checked with a peer. Maybe this is something where you could, you know, speak to a few different people, get a few different opinions, maybe speak to the client and get their opinions. So what objections could be raised? Well, Jonathan could say it's not a problem. It is a problem. Jonathan could say it's just once, and it wasn't, and even if it was, once is enough. So I'm referring to this SBI model of feedback here. One thing that I didn't write in this could be Jonathan could have a legitimate reason for doing this. His wife could be in labor. It could be that he's waiting for a really important call from another client. And so if that's the case, then I could say, okay, perfect, but you need to explain that to the client at the start of the meeting. Hey client, I'm waiting for a really important call. I'm sorry to do this, but you know, my wife is in labor and I might need to leave at any moment. Just letting you know, if I'm checking my phone, it's not a sign of disrespect. It's just family comes first. Very few clients will disagree with that statement. And the ones that do, maybe you don't want them as clients. Maybe they could get angry. I don't think that'll happen, but I can use my conflict resolution skills. You could deny it happened. I saw it. And so, this example here is more of this leadership downwards type example. Okay, so we're just about at time. So I'm going to finish with this. I want you to really please use the worksheet. I want you, next time you know one of these difficult conversations is going to happen, I want you to take a step back and spend the time to go through it. Because it's really going to help you. Like we're all engineers or engineer adjacent here, and so we like algorithms, we like models. And this logistics mindset preparation model is how you're going to make them more effective. Even if you're writing things that you already know, just the process of going through this is going to help you with the mindset to approach it. So there's a few links here. The first link is a link to Debugging Leadership, which is my company, online leadership training courses, self-paced. Think about it. This is being recorded, so I won't use that example. Think about it as another self-paced online learning for technical stuff, but for soft skills instead of technical skills. The worksheet, there's another QR code to the worksheet there if you want that. It's my LinkedIn at the end if you want that. The other thing is this course I put together as this talk, I put together as a full online training course that has multiple examples and lots of descriptions and lots of detail that goes into it, much more detail than I can possibly do in the 60 minutes I have with you. And I've given you that for free. It's part of my paid for content, but as a thank you for coming along to this and investing your time, that third QR code is that entire training course for free. So thank you very much. If you want to ask me any questions about this, if you want to go through the examples in more detail, I love talking about this stuff. It gets me excited. So please find me elsewhere in the conference. Thank you very much.